You hear the word narcissist thrown around all the time, right? But what does it actually mean from a clinical perspective? Today, we're going to separate the internet buzzword from the real medical diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, based on the research.
We see the term everywhere, on social media, in conversations about our exes, you name it. But what does a person with clinical narcissism really look like? Is it just about being arrogant or selfish? Or is there something deeper, more complex going on?
Okay, let's really get into this, because let me tell you, the actual clinical picture is way more nuanced and varied than the simple stereotype we usually see online. It's definitely not just one type of person or one set of behaviors.
And get this, clinical sources actually say that NPD is one of the least studied personality disorders out there. I mean, how wild is that? That alone helps explain why there's so much confusion. Its presentation can change dramatically from one person to the next, which makes it a real challenge, even for clinicians, to diagnose.
So even with all that variability, there is a common foundation. There are core features that kind of hold the whole diagnosis together. Let's break down what those are.
When you get down to the clinical nitty-gritty, it really boils down to 4 key pillars: a sense of grandiosity, a relentless need for admiration, a pattern of superficial and often exploitative relationships, and a fundamental lack of empathy. These are the building blocks of the disorder.
First up, we have grandiosity. And this is not just about having high self-esteem, okay? It's a really deep-seated, exaggerated belief that you are superior, special, and deserve to be treated differently than everyone else. And this can be out in the open, or it can be a secret internal world filled with fantasies of being wildly successful and powerful.
And all that grandiosity, well, it needs constant fuel. And that brings us to the second core feature, this bottomless pit of a need for admiration. They need to be the center of attention, and when that spotlight shifts away from them, they can feel incredibly slighted, mistreated, and can even fly into a rage.
Now this is where things get really fascinating. NPD is not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. Clinicians have actually identified 3 pretty distinct subtypes, or you could say 3 different faces of NPD. And this explains why it can look so different in different people.
So first, there's what's called the high-functioning subtype. Now, these folks might not even seem like they have a disorder on the surface. They're often very successful, super competitive, and they actually use their narcissistic traits to get ahead. The source material gives the example of a Mr. A successful academic who, despite all his accomplishments, is chronically bored and deeply dissatisfied in his marriage.
I mean, that one detail from the case study says so much, doesn't it? It shows you that even when they have all the success in the world on the outside, on the inside, there's this profound emptiness, this constant, gnawing feeling that something better is just around the corner, which makes any real satisfaction impossible.
Then you've got the second phase, the grandiose or overt subtype. This is the one we all picture, right? The classic thick-skinned narcissist who is openly arrogant, entitled, and believes they're exceptional. The source talks about a Miss B who is charming to her doctor at first, but then insults and bullies him when he won't give her the narcotics she's demanding.
And finally, we have the vulnerable, or covert subtype. This is the thin-skinned version, and honestly, it completely shatters the stereotype. On the outside, these individuals can seem really anxious, even shy or withdrawn, but underneath all that is a hidden grandiosity, which they protect with feelings of envy and a habit of blaming everyone else for their failures. Think of Mr. C from the case study, who quit his job because he felt his genius just wasn't being recognized.
So let's just put them side by side for a second. The overt type is arrogant and craves attention. The covert type is shy and hypersensitive to criticism. You see the difference? But here's the kicker. They're both driven by that exact same core grandiosity. They've just developed totally different strategies to protect that very fragile sense of self.
So what's really going on inside? Why these different strategies? This next part really gets to the heart of the internal experience, of what it might feel like to have NPD.
This quote from the source really nails it. For someone with NPD, their entire sense of self is built on this idea that they are exceptional. And while it might seem stable from the outside, it's actually incredibly rigid and fragile, kind of like a house of cards. Any little criticism, any failure threatens to bring the whole thing crashing down. And that explains the subtypes, right? The overt narcissist builds bigger walls to protect it, while the covert narcissist just hides it away.
And you can imagine, when that fragile self feels threatened, it causes some serious distress. You really see that in the staggering rates of other co-occurring disorders. I mean, we are talking about incredibly high rates of substance use, anxiety, mood disorders. This is not a condition that just exists on its own.
Let's just pause on this number for a second. 64.2%. In one major survey, that means almost 2 out of every 3 people with NPD also had a substance use disorder. That statistic alone tells you so much about the level of internal pain we're really talking about here.
Okay, so let's try to pull all of these different threads together just so we can really understand the full picture and clear up some common mix-ups.
A really big one is the confusion between NPD and bipolar disorder, because both can involve grandiosity. So here's the key difference. With NPD, that grandiosity is just always there. It's a chronic, stable part of their personality. But with bipolar disorder, the grandiosity shows up in distinct episodes, in periods of mania or hypomania, and then it goes away. It's cyclical.
So, what are the big takeaways from all of this? First, NPD is a serious clinical diagnosis, not just a label for a personality flaw. Second, it's not one thing. It's a spectrum with very different presentations. Third, at its very core is a deeply fragile sense of self. And finally, it's often accompanied by profound distress and other serious conditions.
And all of this complexity is exactly why this next point is so important. This is a condition that absolutely requires a thorough assessment by a trained professional for an accurate diagnosis. This is not something you can diagnose from a TikTok video or an online quiz.
And all of this leaves us with a really big, kind of provocative question to chew on. In a world where a lot of people show narcissistic traits from time to time, how do we, as a society and even as individuals, draw that critical line between just having difficult personality traits and having a diagnosable clinical disorder that causes real harm and impairment?